It is my pleasure to welcome and introduce our Chairman and CEO, Dr. Eric Schmidt.
I wanted to begin by thanking you all for coming. This has turned out to be the highlight of our year worldwide. And the fact that you come means that we can have a conversation that matters much more broadly than anything I could ever imagine Google doing. So thank you very much. I also wanted to take a minute to thank Lorraine and the whole Google team for doing a tremendous job for 2 days. And they really are phenomenal. It's my pleasure now to introduce Larry Page. Larry, as you know, is one of the co-founders of Google. If you're ever going to have a business partner, this is the best business partner to have because he's one of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, but he's now also one of the foremost computer scientists in the world of his generation. So Larry, you want to join me? And what I thought we would do is I have a couple of questions. Of course, we work together, so I have a couple of questions. No, don't worry, Larry. There's lots. We work together every day. I have lots of questions I could ask. But instead, there's a couple of things that Larry has pushed that I wanted to sort of make sure people understand his view, and then maybe people can ask questions about that or anything else. And as a start of the many things that I have learned from Larry and Sergey, and let's think about the things I've learned: the courage to be unreasonable, the courage to push forward, the value of innovation, the amazing ability of young people to do things that I would never have thought of. I go through the list. One of the things that I learned from you that I thought was really surprising was this interest in geopositioning information. And the way it started, and you probably don't remember this, is 4 or 5 years ago you said, we were looking at a computer science chart, you said, this whole area is really interesting. And I said, okay, that's fine. And so you and Sergey decided to buy what became Google Earth without telling me, which is a separate discussion. We have a few scores to settle, but in any case, it was very successful, so that one's okay. But then you kept going, right? So now, for example, we have things like latitude. And so all of a sudden, this notion, you remember when they sat there and they showed the real-time tracking of people as they were moving along the mobile phones, and they said, oh my God, we're in trouble now. So tell us, what's next?
Well, first of all, I have to say that Eric has been the most amazing business partner I could have, too. And I think he showed the power of slightly more mature people to have more common sense.
Is that what I have become to you after all our years together? The more mature partner.
To sort of counteract our healthy disregard for the impossible with a little bit of reasonable common sense, which has been very helpful. I think, I've been really amazed by the both mobile and geolocation kinds of things. Actually, I went for a walk around the hotel here, and actually have this thing released called My Tracks, which is kind of a little toy app for Android. It actually records everywhere you go. And you say, oh my goodness, it's recording, but that's actually really useful. I don't really know my way around here and so on. So from the airport to the hotel, now I have a little red line that shows where I went. And I actually wasn't paying attention when we were driving, and now I actually know where I am and where I was. I didn't know north from south, whatever. But it's really handy, and it shows up on maps. And I was actually able to tell where I walked, and you get sort of a new perspective on that. These technologies now are very, very easy. Now if you run this on your Android phone, use a little bit of battery power. The guys who made it actually are avid bicyclists. And so it basically shows you your altitude change in a graph, so you can see how high you climbed and how much you descended. They have really good functionality for that. But if you're trying to train yourself to bicycle well, it's really, really useful to have this functionality. You can put all of your rides onto Google Maps. But I think it's going to turn out to be a lot more useful for many, many different areas. I think we're just really at the early stages of that. And this ability to have the street view imagery, the satellite imagery.
Just one controversy after another, Larry.
But it's really, really useful to everybody to be able to see this kind of information, integrate it, understand where you are, understand where you're going, and so on.
Are there some things that you'd like to do with the combination of pictures and GPS information and history and, what happens next, right? We have all these pictures. We have everyone's tracks except for mine.
Well, we will get your tracks. No.
God.
I think one of the things I've been really excited about, we released this thing called Latitude, which I think many of you don't know about yet, but it basically is a feature of Google Maps. So if you're running on a Nokia or an Android or Windows Mobile or a BlackBerry, you can actually you can click on this button in Google Maps called Latitude, and you have to turn it on, you have to agree, and so on, which Eric won't do. But if he did, then once you agree, you can basically share with other people your location. So you can share with your family or your spouse or so on. And it's actually a really useful thing. We've been using it. One of our executives here, Jonathan, he really likes to hassle all the other executives. Like, why were you in Mexico?
There's that funny story. We were sitting in the board meeting, and somebody says, "Where's Jonathan?" And we had a picture, and there he is in the hotel, right, on vacation.
Yeah, and we were hassling him because he wasn't leaving his hotel enough. But it's actually really... we thought he should go out and see the sites.
It's clear. It's important to know that he chose to let us know this information.
Yeah, he did explicitly share with me, and he does a good job hassling me also. But I think this we're still at the very early stages of this, but it's really, really useful. People have we actually had one person, their purse was stolen, their phone was in it, and they claim actually that their phone and purse was found by the police using Latitude, which is a pretty handy thing. So I think, like I said, we're really at the early stages, but these things are already really useful. I encourage you guys to try it out. It won't happen naturally. You have to agree. And one of the cool features we have is you can actually share only our city level information. So if there are people who you're uncomfortable with knowing your exact location, you can default to a city level information, which is still pretty useful, but doesn't cause as many issues as knowing your exact location.
On a different subject, one of the things that you and a small team at Google did 4 or 5 years ago was drive what is ultimately now known as a standard called AJAX. And at the same time, you and Sergey, without my permission, I might add, created a browser, which I eventually fell in love with, called Chrome.
We actually wanted to start it much earlier than you would let us start it.
And you were actually trying to make an important point about, I think, openness and innovation. And today what's happening is the industry now talks about cloud computing, but it really dates from that model. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think I'm actually a little bit surprised, both with Android and with Chrome. We've taken a very different strategy than other companies have. We've really released the source code for them. We've made them really open. Anybody can build a product. You could even build a competitive product for commercial reasons or whatever you want to do. It's the same kind of license that you have for Linux that's enabled Linux to become so successful, which is what we use for our computers. And I think that hasn't quite sunk in, and it's probably because most people in the world aren't developers. But for us as computer scientists, as developers, having access to look at every line of source code that goes into those products, being able to change it, being able to use it for your own purposes, being able to use it for education, and being able to use it just to make the internet work better and to check security and all these things, I think is a really, really important thing for the sort of the functioning of the internet. And so we're really excited about that, and I'm really excited that we're...
So what happens as a result of this? We have a browser, which is really, really neat, and I really, really like Chrome. We have this new mobile platform, Android, which looks like it's going to be really, really successful. What can you do with all of that?
You can make the world work better.
Like what?
I don't know.
Let's work on this, Larry. What are the apps that people are going to build on top of Chrome and Android that are interesting to you?
Well, I think one of the big issues right now with the web is we've gone pretty far with the web and Ajax as a platform. So now you can run mail in your browser. It works pretty well, and so on. But we've kind of, I think, the development cycle for those things is relatively hard, and we've reached. I think we need to improve those platforms a lot. So one of the things we've done with Chrome is make applications run much, much faster. They might run, some things might run 50 times faster in Chrome as they did before. And so that ability lets you build applications you wouldn't have been able to build before that just run on the web. So, while I feel like I pretty much live in a web browser, but there's certain things that's difficult to do in a web browser now. One of those is different kinds of 3D graphics and games and things like that. We've actually released some software that lets you do those kind of things in a browser. And so I think gradually we'll get to this model where you're able to run any piece of software just like a web page. You go to it and it just runs. You don't have to install it. You don't get these silly dialog boxes asking you if you really want to install it and if you really, really want to install it, and that you're going to break your computer, and then your system administrator prevents you from doing that, and so on. So there's just a lot of complexity in there that's not good for end users. And I think we'll be able to build real applications that aren't suffering from those kind of issues.
So to give you all a sense of how we work together, so Larry and Sergey called me into their office. They have one office together. And they said, we're depressed. And I said, like, why? I said, well, we're bored. What do you want to do? And they said, we want to get into the appliance business. And I said, oh, computer appliances, netbooks, that sort of stuff. And they said, no, refrigerators. And so we had this 10-minute conversation about the economics and capital structure of managing refrigerators, which, of course, as you know, can be computer controlled and managed by Google for your benefit, before I realized that they were completely fooling me. And that we are not getting into the refrigerator business at the moment. You remember that? He won't admit it. It's true, trust me. What's interesting, though, is that there's a set of things that you are interested in. So, for example, you're very interested in navigation of automobiles and trucks and devices, and using the sum of these things, cloud computing, GPS, all the things we've talked about. You have a broader mission than people might think in your own mind about what we could do with technology. What are some of the things where technology could really change the conversation? Cars is the most obvious example, but there are probably a whole bunch that you've thought about.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to keep in mind, like, computers are pretty new, right? It's not that computers have been around very long, but a lot of the things that we take for granted, I don't know, planes, trains, automobiles, different kinds of transportation, different things that we do, we're sort of all predate the computer. And it's an interesting kind of exercise, what I like to do for fun, I guess, sort of think about, well, what can we really improve a lot now that we have computers? And you look at some of these problems, we kill a couple million people a year in the world in auto accidents. Do we really need to do that? Computers are actually pretty good at doing those things. I was lucky enough to go to one of the first contests they held for automated cars, which was held in near Las Vegas. And they had these cars driving around by themselves, and they drove actually all day with no human input at all. Actually through very twisty mountain roads and all sorts of things. And that's what's possible now at sort of, if people work hard on it. I'm sure we can get rid of almost all those deaths that happen if we really put our minds to it. So I think we have this sort of idea, well, it's great that we have technology, things are improving and so on. But I sort of feel like we're actually not doing a very good job of using technology to really benefit humankind. Like, if you look at what's really changed about the world, used to be that we all had to farm. Now, maybe 4% or 3% of the population or something like that's farming. And, we do eat pretty well. And that's because we learned how to farm better. We have tractors and all these things. If you were farming by hand still, you would still need a lot of people to farm. But I think that's true in many, many other sectors of the world where we have a lot of people working on things that people don't really need to be doing. And we have safety issues and other things where they could be improved a lot. So I guess I'm very, very optimistic about things that could be really fundamentally improved in the world. And I don't think, the good news is I think we're not actually working on those things. And so I think we could make much more progress than we're making now if we just decided to do it.
Let's have some questions from the audience for a few minutes, and then we'll bring in another distinguished visitor. People, sorry to didn't give you any notice. Go ahead. And let me just remind the people asking the questions that these are on the record.
Thanks. Hello, Guy Phillipson, the Chief Executive of the Internet Advertising Bureau. Welcome, great to see you again. You talked about latitude, and I come with questions about privacy, and governments and the EU seem to be obsessed with privacy issues. Indeed, it's sort of recently the Czechs were trying to do an amendment saying that cookies should be opt-in, which would be a ludicrous consumer experience online if you had an overlay that said, do you want to opt in for this to happen? Some time ago, Eric, you said, well, Google could help you make a decision on your career, which obviously is linked to, your activity online. My question is, do you think, ultimately, consumers and governments will understand how useful the internet can be and the value exchange involved with data being useful, despite the fact that, of course, you may want to use it to advertise useful things to them as well?
Oh yeah, that's a really well-worded question. I think my answer won't be as good as your question. I think there's so much value in having this data. I just mentioned recording where I was or whatever. One of the great things, like when we released Gmail, is it actually had a lot of storage. It could store all of your email. Well, it's a huge privacy issue, but it's also really, really useful. So pretty much anything you talk about in this area is some mix of good and bad, depending on how you look at it. Having a lot of data is really bad from a privacy point of view, but it's really good from a law enforcement point of view. So you got to decide, which one you care about more and what are all the issues. And I think the reality of all these things, they're very complicated. We were asked, we did a little bit of Q&A with press earlier. We were asked about our logs retention, and it's a very complicated issue. I personally believe that the less of those logs we retain, the more likely we are to all die. And that's because we've shown actually with flu trends that we can actually detect pandemic type things, like a lot of people getting sick, where they're starting to get sick, very, very effectively using search queries. But in order to actually tune those algorithms, we need a lot of history to tune those. And so, it's a complicated argument to have, and I'd love to have the argument, but I'd love to do it with more data and more understanding on all sides. And personally, I don't think there's going to be an obvious answer to any of those questions. But I'm worried that we're doing it prematurely.
Yes.
I'm Gert-Jan Munneke, CEO of Traffic for You, a Dutch search engine marketing firm. I was wondering, why are you selling YouTube advertising on a CPM basis and not on an exchange basis? Last year you were telling here about creating a level playing field. That's why you were cutting off the BPF. And now you're introducing also a discount for agencies for the display advertising. Why are you creating this discount, and why are you not selling it through an exchange?
I don't know enough of the specifics to give you sort of the really precise answer. In the case of YouTube, we are trying some new models that are CPM based because we're still looking for the right combination of ad targeting, run-of-site ads, and then in essentially watch page advertising. With respect to the specific practices as to how we do discounting, it's really a function of the local market, who we're working with, and we're trying to make sure that the agencies get the proper amount of compensation for what they're doing.
I'm a strong believer in the exchange platform, and you're doing it in the other Google. You can display, advertise, but not on YouTube.
I'm trying to avoid pre-announcing a product.
Thank you.
If you get my GIF. Good.
Hello, Eric and Larry. Thank you for getting us and myself to this wonderful event. I'm Loïc Lemer from Seismic. I was wondering if you could comment on the growth of Twitter and comment on any Google plans to either integrate the real-time results of Twitter or launch your own?
I think people really want to do stuff real time, and they've done a great job of that. I think we've done a relatively poor job of doing things that work on the per second basis. So I've actually been asking, for example, our search teams for a long time, like, you need to index every second. And they sort of laugh at me, and they're like, oh, it's okay if it's a few minutes old. And I'm like, no, it needs to be every second. And now I think they understand that. So I I think we will do a better job of some of those things now that we have those examples. I think I think it does take time to really integrate information. So if you really want up to the second information, it's not going to be as good if you're willing to wait a couple minutes. And I think that's an important aspect of what's going on online. You need people to make sense of things. So I'm not sure everybody needs to be seeing the stuff every second. I'm not sure that's the right model either.
Go ahead.
Hi, Suchi Mukherjee from Gumtree. So you have a whole array of products, and each one is pretty cool. But each one creates an interpretation of what Google is. So you could think of MyTracks or Latitude as something that creates overwhelmingly interesting data points that others might use. You could think of Chrome, if you were really cynical, as something that you wanted to beat up Mozilla with. You could think of a whole bunch of interpretations based on the various products you have. So I suppose, Eric, my question is, what is Google's mission? And how do you keep yourselves focused as you run a 20,000 person business?
When we started, we focused on the end user. And we focused on the end user both from the standpoint of the end user experience as well as the advertising experience. And that was our original organizing. And then eventually we added our business partners as part of our business focus. With respect to the strategy of the company, one day Larry and Sergey and I were sitting in the room, and Sergey looked at us and said, it's obvious that our strategy should be to work on problems at scale that no one else can work on. So Larry, what is the mission of the company?
I call it kind of the toothbrush problem.
Yes.
Well, there aren't that many things you use as much as a toothbrush. So you should be working on those things. I mean, it sounds kind of funny, but I think search is
So
something.
Google as toothbrush?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, Google is something you use probably as much as a toothbrush, the search. Email is something you actually use more than a toothbrush. And there aren't many other such things. So we try to stay focused on things that really matter to people, that they're going to use a lot, and things also that we feel that we can improve a lot, that you can make the products much better. And that's kind of our overall strategy.
A lot of times what will happen is product managers or engineers will come in with projects which are largely derivative. They're something that they saw that they're copying in a different way and so forth. And those are always very bad meetings. The meetings that are interesting are the ones where here's a new idea, here's a new market, here's a new problem, here's a problem that can be solved that affects the globe. And that's really how we see ourselves and literally how we run the company. Shall we? Let's go ahead and move and add one more person. You see an empty chair. It's a pleasure from my perspective to introduce Sir Richard Branson. You want to come on up? And there's no way I can properly introduce Sir Richard except to say, as you know, he is basically the founder of a group of companies that has more than 360 companies, which is pretty impressive by any means. And he has
Yeah, we only have one, Eric.
I know, but by the time I'm done, you're going to do a lot more. He's done things like Virgin Galactic, the Virgin Health Bank. He was knighted in 1999. When I think of Sir Richard, I think of the original Virgin Records and the kind of entrepreneurship that he exhibited, 35, 40 years ago, which is his lifetime is really about that. So what I thought would be interesting would be to have the two of you, who are sort of my two sort of favorite true entrepreneurs, to talk a little bit about what are the greatest challenges before us. In your case, Sir Richard, you're as interested in problems that are not business problems as you are clever in solving amazing, scalable business problems in your whole career. How do you decide? You seem like you have so many going on. Talk a little bit about the ones that are most interesting to you, and why do they matter? Why do you spend so much time on them?
Well, it's good to see you both anyway. I suppose I've got to an age where I spend more than 50% of my time on sort of on more social-oriented ideas, seeing whether I can use my entrepreneurial skills and the entrepreneurial skills of the people around me to look at some of the major issues around the world and see if we can tackle them slightly more differently than they've been tackled in the past. And we've sort of chosen 3 areas. One is disease control. Another one is global warming. And the other one is conflict resolution issues, to see if we can...
And you've actually pretty active in the Darfur issues most recently.
Well, I don't look like it, but I've just done a 3-day fast on just to take over from somebody else, and Peter Gabriel is in the process at the moment.
You are looking pretty skinny.
Oh, thank you, dear. Just before the invasion of Iraq, we were trying to think, is there any way we can stop our respective governments invading? We'd seen the situation with Idi Amin in Uganda, whereby some elders had gone and seen him and actually persuaded him to go and live in Saudi Arabia, and Uganda became a well-run democratic country as a result. So we talked to Nelson Mandela and we talked to Kofi Annan, and they agreed to go and see Saddam Hussein to ask him if he would like to, if he would consider going and living in Libya to avoid his country going through an unnecessary war. And sadly, the bombing literally started the day that the plane was due to leave Johannesburg to go and have the meeting. But as a result of that, at meetings, in fact Larry attended many of them, we decided to form a group of elders headed up by Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Tutu, and 12 wonderful people with high moral authority that Nelson Mandela chose, people like Kofi Annan and President Carter from America, and
Mary Robinson was here.
Is she here?
She was here early.
Okay. Mohammed Yunus. And they use their moral authority to go to conflict situations and see if they can resolve them. So last year when Kenya was falling apart, Kofi Annan, Archbishop Tutu, and Nelson Mandela's wife, Gracia Michel, went to Kenya, and they brought the leader of the opposition party and the president together in a game reserve for 2 weeks, knocked heads together. Coalition government got formed, and there hasn't been a conflict since. So there are only so many, weapons in the arsenal to try to bring about peace. You've got the United Nations that can go so far. You have extreme situations like fasting, etc., to try to bring attention to things. You've now got the elders, and you've got individual governments that can try to do it. And the elders anyway is one organisation that has got off, I think, to a good start.
And because you have yourself a global brand, you can help promote the values that you care so much about. I'm not familiar with the CDC, the disease control work that you're doing. Talk a little bit about what does it mean to work on disease control?
Africa's got thousands of wonderful organizations doing lots of tremendous work. But unlike America or unlike Europe, it doesn't have a center for disease control. And we're in the process of now setting up a center that can help coordinate all these organizations that are doing great works, but can also jump on new diseases that may be emerging much quicker than they're currently jumped upon. So in South Africa, a new strain of TB emerged about 2 years ago, and before they really got on top of it, it was already out of control. And so it's really it's an organization based very much on the American CDC or the European CDC, just making sure
does it have a name yet? Is it just called the CDC?
It'll be the African Center for Disease Control.
And it'll be based in?
in Cape Town.
in Cape Town.
We should
And-
say too, like AIDS, I believe, was present for quite a time before it propagated out of Africa. So knowing about these things, I think, is really, really important.
Yeah, and I mean, Google have obviously done extremely good work on, for instance, empowering nurses around the world to, get information in quickly if they see something cropping up, and I believe that with the latest outbreak of flu, it was Google that actually had got the information, I think, quicker than even than the American CDC.
And what's interesting is these themes all interact. Because as you know, conflict drives poverty, poverty drives war and health issues. And the greatest victims of wars are not, in fact, the soldiers, but all the people who have been killed by virtue of the diseases and destruction around them. You're also very focused on global warming, I think for the same reasons, which is that it threatens the globe in a very coherent way. How do you make a difference? What are the things that you're doing to bring that forward? I see, again, the pattern. Tell us there how you make it happen.
Well, with global warming, there are different camps as to how serious this problem is. But I think that when you have learned environmentalists like James Lovelock, who believe that we're already too late, you have to sort of, as an insurance policy, take his warnings, I think, very seriously. I mean, hopefully he's wrong, but let's just say he's right.
And we should say that what happens is there's a carbon buildup that's independent of what we do going forward, simply because of what's happened historically. And there's a model of that carbon buildup to a certain level. So even if we were to stop today, we will pay for many, many years. It takes 100 years for the oceans to process the carbon dioxide and the acidification that's already occurring, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So take James Lovelock's worst assumptions. I mean, even if we save the rainforests, even if we manage to get Britain and Europe to move over to a nuclear power as quickly as possible, even if we move over to battery-operated cars throughout Europe, etc., that may not be sufficient. And in that extreme case, James Lovelock is forecasting billions of deaths as a result of global warming. So I think there should be an organisation that looks at that eventuality and plans for it, and just sees whether there could be any extreme ways of avoiding it. And I know Prince Charles will turn over in his grave if he was dead, but anyway,
Unfortunately, that's not the case.
He would not like hearing me say it, but I think that we ought to be looking at is there a geoengineering fix for the problem?
Assuming it gets really bad first. That's what you're saying?
Yes, maybe assuming it gets really bad first, but there may be some geoengineering ideas that you could do. I'll give you one example in a moment. That would be good for the world anyway. So, so, all right. Well, let's just take one idea. So biochar. Biochar is basically taking all the waste product in the fields, taking the waste product from your factories, from your homes, from your offices, and turning it into charcoal. And then ploughing that charcoal back into the fields. Now, the fields benefit because it retains water. It's a very good fertilizer. The globe benefits because if you could actually make it an economical way of doing it, if all farms in the world were to do it, you would actually take out of the Earth's atmosphere the equivalent amount of carbon as planes, buses, lorries, cars use every year and put it back every year. And it's gone. And you could do that, year after year after year. And actually, the machines that that people are trying to make to do that can also make energy, which would be of benefit to the farm. Someone's trying to, make the whole thing economical at the same time. So ideas like that should be examined, and we're setting up a carbon war room to examine some of those those kinds of
Right,
ideas.
to try to push these things forward as quickly as we can. I'm concerned that we don't have very much time. The final thing I wanted to ask you, and then I want to open up questions.
Let me ask a question.
Larry.
What happens if the ocean level rises a lot? What do we do?
Well, I mean, again, the Carbon War Room has ideas there. I mean, and the Carbon War Room, by the way, is only just being put together. And again, thank you for attending all these Carbon War Room meetings. One idea, for instance, is as the ocean rises, you create giant inland lakes. Now, the advantage of creating giant inland lakes in, say, desert regions of Africa or Asia is that the evaporation from those lakes can well, first of all, the lakes themselves will help cool the earth down. The evaporation from those lakes can create trees and fertilization in the area. You may be able to get a hydroelectric dam attached to these giant lakes, which create fresh water. And also, you stop some of the sea level rise. You're not going to be able to do much from the lakes, but it's something worth exploring. There are downside potentials, again, which need to be examined. So if you create a giant lake in Africa, some of the dust that goes, some of the windstorms that go and blow that sand over the Amazon, may have an effect on the Amazon. So all of these things have got to be examined very carefully before anything's done, but they certainly should be examined.
So certainly in America, you're also known for your interest in aviation and in space. And you've done some remarkable things in terms of normal aviation. What are you doing in extraordinary aviation and space travel that you want us to know about? And do we need to sign up now, and is there a waiting list?
Well, as you well know, Virgin and Google, we set up a joint space company last year called Virgil.
The first human colony on Mars in...
So the idea is simply to look. We were looking for volunteers last year to go to Mars.
And
the only problem was that it was a one-way ticket.
Come back.
As it should be. As it should be.
Absolutely, it's an exploratory mission, and interestingly, we had some thousands of people apply to go to Mars on this one-way basis, and we had husbands telling their wives that they were definitely going to go, and the wives saying, but darling, don't you love me? Anyway, by midday, it was clear that it was an April Fool's joke, and they had to sort out their issues with their wives.
Gmail was an April Fool's joke too.
Gmail is it?
Yeah, that's when we launched it.
I never knew that. Anyway, that worked out all right. And sometimes, it's funny, April Fool's things can become realities, so maybe one day Virgil will become a reality.
I think we'll offer trips back, though.
They're too expensive.
Back here on Earth, we are trying more modest things, and obviously Virgin Galactic Airways is a very exciting project. And actually, I've got a very short video, which we might just play, just to give a taste of where we are with Virgin Galactic, and then I'll say a couple of words of it. We'll only play half the video, it's about 8 minutes long. So.
Well, hello, I'm Richard Branson. We've been fortunate enough to have achieved some pretty extraordinary things at Virgin over the years, but perhaps none quite as amazing as what you'll see in the next few minutes. Virgin Galactic is on its way to becoming the world's first commercial space line. Our suborbital space trips promise to be the most intense and wonderful experiences that our passengers have ever had.
We are in the process of optimizing, absolutely optimizing the experience that you will have when you fly in space. And it's just going to be fabulous.
The things that people want to do in space, they want to go there, they want to see the planet Earth, they want to experience weightlessness, they want to have a mind-blowing experience.
The day that Bert won the X Prize was a hugely significant one for us. When it was all over, I remember chatting to Bran Binney, the pilot on that epic flight. He's an enormously experienced and talented test pilot and a master of understatement.
It's got all the right elements to excite the people for all the right reasons. The ride up is momentous, the view at the top is hugely rewarding. The ride back down is pretty spectacular as well. Pictures are pretty dramatic, but the eye is so much more dynamic. You combine that with the other things going on, the weightlessness, it's pretty wonderful. The rocket motor ride is pretty memorable as well. You're not going to soon forget that, especially ignition.
Before you ignite it, you're indicating 140 knots or so. And within 10 seconds or 11 seconds, you're supersonic. So, you get 3 Gs on your back instantly when it lights. And boy, that first 10 seconds is about the most dynamic flying I've ever done.
This wave of energy flows through the vehicle, and it's eye-watering.
It is eye-watering. When you look out the window and you see the curvature of the Earth, and you can see the edge, along the edge of the Earth, you can see this thin blue line that is the atmosphere. And the colors and the textures on the ground, and it's a mind-blowing thing to see. It really is. I mean, I'm sure everybody who's been in the shuttle or on the space station knows the same thing, but I'd never seen that before, and it really was a remarkable experience.
We're designing our spacecraft so that each of our passengers will have the room and the freedom to enjoy the amazing sensation of weightlessness.
The system will also be large enough to allow those individuals to really experience weightlessness, to really experience the beauty of the curvature of the Earth, and to be able to see that from any angle in the ship that they're at. And also to be able to experience the real feeling of the power of flight into space.
While you're up there, you got 4 to 5 minutes of 0G and an enjoyment of an environment you've never experienced before. You've maybe seen it on covers of magazines, and now you're experiencing it firsthand. Right. It's a delight, it's a wonder. And
I'm sure with everybody being loose in there, they'll be letting go M&Ms and taking pictures of each other. And I mean, it'll just be the most fabulous thing that you could imagine.
Safety is and will always be our guiding star. And we're helped enormously in that objective by Bert Rutan's genius for design and construction.
Okay, well, just give you a taste of it anyway.
The only question I have is when?
Where we are now is the mothership that takes the spaceship up is finished and flying, and the rockets have finished their testing. In December, the spaceship will be finished, and it will then start its extensive test programs. And once it's finished its test programs, we look forward to welcoming you up.
And I have a feeling Larry and Sergey will be among your first passengers, and I will then sit and worry.
You're the pilot, Eric.
I know, that's why I worry. So as you see your life going forward, and it sounds like you're spending at least half your time on these new initiatives, what happens in 10 years? What is success for you? Do you really think that the conjunction, if you will, of the focus on health, the focus on emerging diseases, the focus on peace, the focus on conflict, all of those things, how does it play out? How do we know that it's been so hugely successful as we want it to be?
Well, I think as everybody in this room has just got to do the best that they're capable of, and create things that we can be proud of, and anyway, that's I think what I'm sure that's what everybody in this room are trying to do. Some things will be successful, on other things will fall flat on our face. But I think the important thing is that if you're in a position to make a difference, and you've got to give it your best.
I have a sense that if you work in the Virgin Group, you have a lot of fun, that it's a fun place to work. Isn't that what comes across?
I have a feeling that if you worked in a Google group, you have a lot of fun too. But no, we have a lot of fun, and yeah, Larry and I are kite surfing. We also have quite a lot of fun outside.
Yes, I've heard those stories too. Let's get some comments or questions from the audience on these subjects or on anything else. Who would like to get started? Give it a minute. Yes, go ahead.
Really amazed by the space adventures, as probably everybody in this room is. Prince Charles this morning gave this, I thought, very moving and inspiring speech about saving the rainforest. How does it get together? The kind of saving the rainforest and the carbon emissions and of space traveling.
Well, I think I'm going to dinner with him tonight, as is Larry, and and we're on his excellent on his committee and on his excellent organisation, and saving the rainforest is extremely important for all the reasons he said today. But it's equally important that I think that people invest in new technology. And when we stopped the film, we went just before that. After that, we went into the environmental benefits of our space program in comparison to NASA's space program. I mean, we'll be able to send people into space for the same environmental cost as sending you to New York and back on a normal airline. And I think in time we might even be able to get it so that the cost of sending you into space is carbon neutral. We're almost there already. We're a byproduct of our space program is we're going to be able to send satellites into space for almost no carbon output at all, and a fraction of the cost that it currently costs to send satellites into space. So we're going to be able to give individual universities their own satellites in space. Something which they would never have dreamt of up until now. And people like James Lovelock, have booked their seat on Virgin because he feels that it's important for as many people as possible to look back on the Earth and see how the beauty of Earth and see how important it is to get out and do something about trying to save this Earth. I think that assuming that James Lovelock, that his is an extreme situation. Assuming that we can still just get out there and come up with other alternative ways of saving the Earth other than geoengineering ideas. I think that but between us all using our brain power, we ought to be able to develop clean fuels, for our cars, for our buses, for our lorries, for our planes, for our spaceships. That do no damage to the environment. And I think that a lot of people in this room and the Virgin Group as well are trying to do exactly that. Recently we've had a major breakthrough with something called isobutanol, which works in an aeroplane, doesn't freeze at 35,000 feet, can be made from sugar as a sugar-based fuel. The world is awash with sugar. And if we can make enough quantities of it, certainly all the Virgin Atlantic's fleet should be able to run on it, and hopefully other airlines as well. Thank you.
So let's go ahead.
Richard Branson. My name is Mike Butcher from TechCrunch. We cover Silicon Valley and obviously Google, and Silicon Valley are great examples of entrepreneurship in the world, and you yourself are a great example of that as well. What do you think are some of the things that governments in Europe can do to address the issue, the double-headed issue of stimulating the entrepreneurial environment to address environmental issues as well as the economic issues, the sort of double-headed issues of entrepreneurship?
Well, I think the most important thing right now is making sure that the banks lend more money. So, I'm sure there are a lot of people in this room who've had great ideas who are suddenly finding the banks are not supporting those ideas. And in fact, I was at Downing Street this morning with some other business leaders urging just that. And then I think there needs to be, sort of, like if you take the environment as an example, let's create, let's have a vision to try to be carbon neutral in the next 10 years. Let's take the UK as an example. Let's get out there and take on Greenpeace and say to them, nuclear energy is, cleaner. It's done less damage to the world than almost any other fuel. For God's sake, let's build nuclear energy stations, and then let's power all our cars and all our buses, on battery power from those nuclear stations. I think there's got to be some big bold steps taken. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Branson, Loic Lemer. I just wanted to say thank you. Last week I was depressed with a recession, tough times. I'm sure in some of your businesses sometimes you must feel it too. And I woke up and I saw a picture of you on the internet on a kite surf, not with Larry this time, but with a beautiful naked person on your shoulders. And here's my question: How do you do it?
You want to go into this some more with us?
No, but I'm pretty sure that you know about this picture. It's like, what is your advice that we think the way you do when you appear in a wedding suit in the Trocadero, and like even when it's tough like this, that entrepreneurs and anybody in this room can have this energy to, just change things. What's your advice to not be boring?
Well, Larry was actually meant to be on Necker that weekend and cancelled out. And I sent him the picture the next day and just to let him know what he'd missed. But,
we were trying to figure out if it was photoshopped or not.
No, there was this French photographer who was on the island and said, "Would you mind having a picture with my girlfriend?" And I said, "Fine." "Would you mind if she came on your back when you went kite surfing?" I said, "Fine." "Would you mind if she didn't have any clothes on?" And I said, "Well, as an English gentleman, fine." No, I think you should enjoy what you do in life and throw yourself into it and have a lot of fun and not take yourself too seriously. And I'm lucky enough to have French photographers wanting their naked girlfriend on my shoulders. But thank you.
I think that goes under the definition of making your own luck in life. In making your own luck. Any final questions? I want to just take a minute to thank Sir Richard for what he does. I think that in my career, and I've obviously watched you do this, what I like the most about you is you haven't stopped. You feel like you're just starting. And that is a great way to live one's life. And I think Larry, who I admire as well, who I think is in a similar scale, will probably follow a very similar path, which is why the two of you have become such great friends. So thank you both for coming. Thank you all. Nikesh?